Before I carry on, I need to, once again, re-emphasize that the increase of grace is a reference to reaching spiritual maturity. One of the characteristics of spiritual maturity is that you become a beneficiary of the increase of grace. How can you increase grace? Is there such a thing as being able to increase grace in your life? No, there's no such thing. You cannot do it by your own effort, by your own human works. You've already been given saving grace. That's enough to be saved. Saving grace and your whole salvation package, that's all grace. Phase 2, for you to execute the spiritual life, you've been given logistical grace. Logistical grace, meaning that this, another name for it is living grace. This is a grace provision given by God so that you can remain alive in the devil's world and have everything necessary to execute the spiritual life. But for those who do use that logistical grace, living grace, they increase grace. And I said it is not possible, it's possible if you use God's grace provision. You cannot do it through your own effort, through your own endeavor, through your sweet personality and how good you are. Not at all. You cannot increase grace. If you're one of those that depends entirely on your personality dynamics, on PR, public relations, on your own appearance, on you trying to obtain leverage by your own sweet and gregarious ways and all that, and you call that Christianity, then the only grace you're going to receive is the saving grace of salvation if you are a believer, and the living grace that you have. But you bet you're not going to increase any grace because you're not using God's grace provision to advance all the way to spiritual maturity. And the increase of grace we find in 1 Timothy chapter 1 verse 14. Paul increased grace in association with doctrine and love. For after all, when you increase and grow inside the divine power sphere, you increase doctrine and you increase love. And this causes the increase of grace. We see it in James chapter 4 verse 6. God gives grace, more grace, greater grace to the humble. This is where my pastor got this term from. And people said in the 70s, for he coined this term in the early 70s. And people said, super grace. What is super grace? Where does that come out in the Bible? Where is that in the Bible? It's nowhere in the Bible. No, it's very much in the Bible. It's very much right here. The increase of grace. That is super grace. Again, 1 Timothy chapter 1 verse 14. James chapter 4 verses 5 and 6. And that's where you can find the increase of grace. The increase of grace is one of those characteristics of spiritual maturity. Once you advance all the way to gate 8 of the divine power sphere, you reach super grace. And I'll mention before, first of all, my pastor used to call this super grace A. He called gate 6 super grace B, and gate 8 he called it super grace. Obviously, as he advanced and he coined new words and he advanced himself spiritually, gate 5 he called it spiritual self-esteem to describe some of the characteristics of gate 5. Gate 6 he called it spiritual autonomy, and gate 8 he called it spiritual maturity, all this being part of spiritual adulthood. Now these remain the same. Super grace is still very much a characteristic of these gates, but he changed the names so as to provide new descriptions. Now, super grace, you start getting a taste of them in gate 5, but they are fully released. These super grace blessings are fully released in gate 8. Also, another name that he gave them is escrow blessings. Why escrow? Because these blessings remain deposited in escrow in Christ until a condition is met. The condition being that you advance all the way to gate 8 of the divine power sphere. Once you meet that condition, boom, those blessings are released. Now these blessings, they belong to you. They're always going to belong to you. But God has to remain consistent. He has to remain just. His grace has to provide grace as part of his grace for him to remain righteous in providing you all these wonderful super grace blessings, but he cannot give them to you unless you have maximum doctrine inside of your soul. There's no way he's going to give you those marvelous blessings without the capacity. There's no way he's going to give you all these wonderful mental dynamics, capacity for life, capacity for happiness, capacity for blessing, capacity for sex, capacity for romance, etc., without the doctrinal capacity. And the moment that you finally reach that doctrinal capacity, then grace says, now I remain righteous and providing you all these wonderful things. You see, he's not going to give you anything if he's going to compromise his character. The only way he gives you something is to be able to give it to you without compromising his wonderful character, his righteousness and justice. And grace, as we mentioned last time in the doctrine of grace, grace is everything that he's free to do. Free to do and free to give to the believer, and remain true to his character within the parameters of his character. And so this is what it is. At the moment that you reach and you have maximum doctrine in the soul, God remains righteous and giving you those super grace blessings, escrow blessings. The reason why he releases them at gate 8. Now, this is super grace right here, the increase of grace. And you have logistical grace. First of all, phase 1, we mentioned this different categories of grace. Saving grace, all the things that you receive at salvation, including the plus R, eternal life, creation of the human spirit, all the indwellings, etc. And a lot of this stuff is for you to execute the plan of God in phase 2. And so let's take the plus R. You continue having plus R in phase 2. In fact, you're going to have it forever. The justice of God up in heaven, one half of divine integrity, looks down at the righteousness of God imputed inside of you, the other half of divine integrity, and it says, ooh la la, look at that. It has met my standard. This guy down there has met my standard. Obviously not on your own, through your own works or your own character. It is based on the character of God, based on the grace of God. He imputed that righteousness at the moment of salvation. He did the work. So, but the justice of God looks down at that righteousness which now belongs to you and says, ooh la la, here we go, boom. And it gives you blessing, blessed. I'm going to keep this guy alive in the devil's world. Notice, in principle, this is both for loser believers and for winner believers. Loser believers does not imply that they lose their salvation. It simply means that they are not advancing in the plan of God. They're not using 1 John 1:9, not learning doctrine under the right pastor teacher on a daily basis. The winner believer is the one who does do those things. He exploits logistical grace all the way to super grace. And so the exploitation of logistical grace results in the increase of grace. Once you arrive at spiritual maturity, grace increases. And so down this pipeline comes now a different category of grace provision, also known as super grace. For the immature believer, for the baby believer, he only has logistical grace and he also has divine discipline. That's all he has going for him. But for him who advances all the way to maturity, not only does he have logistical grace, he also has super grace provision down that same pipeline. But also, he also, not divine discipline, he has suffering for blessing, a different category of suffering. Now, again, the exploitation of this logistical grace results in super grace. And you cannot exploit it if you do not have any doctrine. If you have no doctrine, you're not going to be able to detect grace. For the detection or the identification or the knowledge of grace depends on doctrine. If you have no doctrine inside of your soul, you're not going to be able to detect God's grace in your life. Here, you start learning doctrine, you detect God's logistical grace, and after detecting it and knowing it, you exploit it, and you exploit it all the way to super grace. Now, this is what we have. So that grace having increased through the greater numbers, this is not an evangelistic passage. It is not talking about the increase of more converts. And so even though a lot of translations try to imply that, it is talking about more people reaching super grace, having increased through the greater numbers, may cause to abound the thanksgiving. And so here comes super grace provision. So let's just pretend this is a mess, right? But just know that there's grace provision down this pipeline. The super grace believer has enough doctrine to detect this super grace blessing. And what does he return as he detects this super grace blessing? He returns Eucharisteo, Eucharistia. Eucharistia, from which we get the word Eucharist from. Good thanks, Eucharistia. So he returns thanksgiving. He has the capacity to detect grace. He produces gratitude, and this gratitude manifests itself through thanksgiving. So to the extent that you receive this super grace blessing, you return it back with thanksgiving. If you only receive a little bit of grace, well, the thanksgiving is going to be also minimal. But once the believer has super grace, he detects them, he receives them, he enjoys them, he's going to return also big thanksgiving as well. And so that's why it says, Perisio, the may cause thanksgiving to abound. And now, let us go over the doctrine of the super grace blessings. I had promised you before that we were going to go over the blessings. I've taken long, but here we are finally. I knew this verse was going to come along, even though I did not really understand it entirely a few months ago. Blessings of super grace. Super grace blessings. First of all, Roman numeral number 1 says, when the believer who is positive towards doctrine arrives at gate 8 of the divine power sphere, he not only is a beneficiary of logistical grace, but he also becomes a beneficiary of super grace blessings. Now, I just explained this to you right now. What it really is saying is that you exploit God's grace provision and logistical grace so that you can reach the point of maturity and enjoy those super grace blessings. Roman numeral number 2 talks about the different types of super grace blessings. And in category 1, or point 1, we have spiritual blessings. If you're going to start with blessings, you're going to have to start with the spiritual first. God does not give you temporal blessings without beginning with the spiritual. God does not give you anything without first beginning with the capacity. Capacity is spiritual. They are spiritual results inside of your soul. Spiritual blessings. What do we have? Capacity for life, capacity for love, capacity for blessing, capacity for happiness, which results in the freedom from circumstances. Again, I mentioned, he does not give you anything without the capacity. If he were to give you something without the capacity, he would be unjust. But when you reach and you have enough doctrine inside of your soul, grace says, God remains free and true and righteous in giving you these blessings, because you have the right amount of doctrine, maximum doctrine inside of your soul. You're able to handle it. So capacity for life, capacity for love. For those who, this is not only love in category 1, love towards God, but it's also in all the other categories. Category 2, love for you lovebirds that want the right woman, and for you ladies who have been waiting for your man, for the right man. So it's capacity for love. If you want to become a great lover, yes, this is the way to do it. Increase in doctrine. You're going to become a very thoughtful person, a person full of appreciation and capacity for life. And as a result, you're going to have capacity for your significant other. But before that, if you're still too full of yourself, you have no capacity. Arrogance is the antithesis of all these capacities. Notice that? This is all a result of capacity righteousness. This capacity righteousness is produced by doctrine inside of your soul. And this capacity righteousness emanates to capacity for life, capacity for love, capacity for blessing, capacity for happiness, which results in the freedom from circumstances. This happiness does liberate you from circumstances. You are so happy that regardless of the situation and all the people trying to get you mad and the little monsters at the house being little brats, everything, just you will have freedom from them controlling your soul, because you have this happiness inside of your soul. It liberates you from being subject to whatever they're doing. There's also the ability to interpret contemporary history. This is a big one. I have not gone over these doctrines pertinent to this, but it is very important, especially now in these times where everything's just so mixed up, everything's distorted. How do you know what truth is? How do you know what side you're supposed to side on? I mean, just take a look at politics. On one side, you have the socialists, you have the Bernie Sanders types, the Elizabeth Warren types. Or in New York, that new guy who was just voted, that Zoran guy, socialist. Socialism just keeps arising. And even though you might think, okay, socialism is now no longer a threat, and it's gone, it just wants to pop up once again, and again, and again. These are things that have risen since the Greek Empire, since the Athenian Empire. They had socialistic tendencies. Since the Roman Empire, all the time as well, they had socialistic tendencies. So don't think that socialism and communism is just something that began in the time of Marx. I think it began since before that, immediately before that. Sir Thomas More in his book Utopia. And so socialism is satanic, and it's always going to remain since ancient history to now. And so how do you interpret history? It's so difficult. On one side you have the socialist, and you say, okay, I'm not a socialist. I'm for free market enterprise. I am for my rights. I am for freedom. I am against government intruding upon my life, intruding upon my transactions and all that. And wonderful, yes. And so what do? What's on the other side? You have the Trumpists, all the Trumpers. So what do you do now? Is that correct? Oh, they must be correct. They spoke about guns. They spoke about free market enterprise, etc. Wrong. Even though Donald Trump might mention things about guns, and wonderful, yes, and he might mention certain things about free enterprise, even though he's contradicting himself now with the tariffs and all this stuff. That doesn't mean you incline towards them. You must be able to interpret the fact that the conservative movement has been hijacked by these Trump types, these Putin lover types, and there's nothing conservative as far as American conservatism is concerned. There is nothing compatible with American conservatism and Russian conservatism. Nothing at all. That's a mafia state. It's been like that since the time of the czars, since Ivan the Terrible. And there's the government is the mafia. If you want to govern with mafia government, just go down south of the border, go to Mexico, and just go ahead and you can enjoy it all you want. Why the hell do you want the same thing over here? Russia and America have no compatibility at all. So, very important to be able to interpret contemporary history. If not, you're going to join the wrong side of history, and we know that joining the wrong side of history can ruin your spiritual life. You join the wrong side of history, you make the wrong decisions. You make the wrong decisions, you start thinking the wrong things, and that ruins your spiritual life. But this is more for another day, and this is coming up. Also, the maximum function of the honor code of the royal family of God. This is Romans chapter 12, impersonal love, and a total sense of security in the plan of God with respect to my life. Proverbs chapter 8, verse 33 to 36. Proverbs chapter 8, verse 18.